Welcome to Unchosen, where we use our scripture foundation in order to discuss certain topics as being led by the Spirit. Today's topic is entitled Exposing the Lies on History. Now, this is going to be a very touchy topic depending on how the viewer accepts the information that's going to be presented. Some of you may go away feeling fulfilled, whereas some others may feel a sense of rage by what you're going to see and hear. But however, the truth will always reign supreme. And of course, to start this off, we're going to firstly start on a scripture. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. See, the Most High requires us to study in order to show thyself approved unto him, not for the likes of men, not for the validation of men, but for the validation of God himself. Linking this to the topic that's at hand, we know from an early age we're taught specific things in our schools, especially in our history classes, whether it be books on Shakespeare, the World Wars, the Civil Rights Act, and so on. And from these early ages, the things that we are taught can have a dramatic impact on how we see the world. It makes us believe certain things, which we can't deem to be true at the time, but we unconsciously take up these lessons as facts because it's something that is widely accepted. But we didn't do what God required of us. We didn't study to show thyself approved, to rightly divide the word of truth from the lies. I remember I was taught a lot of things in my history class about the people that existed throughout time. I mean, we had the Vikings, the Saxons, the Tudors, and I always used to ask myself, where do I fit in with all of this? Where is my history? What's my identity? Who am I? Why am I only being taught that the only notable part of my history was during the 1600s? What was my people doing prior to this? Where were they? What civilizations did they build? With these many questions, we're going to generate answers. Let's go. Alright, so the first book we're going to read is called Riddles of Prehistoric Times by James H. Anderson. On the left hand side is an image of Mr. Anderson himself, clearly someone of so-called European descent. So let's see what message he's trying to interpret when reading this book. So this on the first page, it says, this work is a kind of log or record. So keep that in mind. This is something that he wants to use as future reference. So let's read on. It says, pondering on the riddle of existence, compiled this book, which is but a resume of facts gleaned while he was seeking to know whence came the world and its peoples. So that's two things you can bear in mind. He said it's a written record and it's also a resume of facts. So what Mr. Anderson was trying to do here was trying to seek the origins of people around the world. Now before we get into it, we're just going to get into a bit more background surrounding the book. So this is from Google Books, and this is something you can access online. And it states, this book has been considered by academicians and scholars of great significance and value of literature. So that lets you know the information found in this book is something that your scholars would recommend as authentic, and it's something that anyone can use as future reference. And what did we read earlier? It was a resume of facts. Now let's see what facts this author wrote. This is on page 58. It reads, the first inhabitants of southern Europe, northern Africa, Arabia, France, and the British Isles were a race of small men who did not average in height more than about 4 feet 5 inches. They were of slight build with a dark complexion. So hold on. The first question you should ask yourself is, why wasn't I taught this in my history class? Why didn't my teacher tell me that the first inhabitants of these lands of Europe were in fact dark-skinned? This is information that they should have been teaching us from an early age. But anyway, let's continue. So it says, they were of a slight build with a dark complexion. And I want to skip down to where the next red line is. It says, they were African people, and there appears evidence that they sometimes practice cannibalism. So the author's telling you flat out that these were African people who migrated to these areas. I mean, we look at the so-called European today, and we always identify them as the white race, when in actual fact, the real European is you. As stated in history, the real Arabian, the real French, the real British is you. Anyway, the next book we're going to read is a book called Ancient and Modern Britons Volume 1 by David McRitchie. This is on page 16. And it reads, "We have just seen that many scientific men hold that there are some grounds for believing that portions, at least, of Europe have formerly been inhabited by black, tawny, and copper-colored races." So here it is again. Another author stating that the original Europeans were people of dark skin. But this ain't the part I want to zoom in on. The part I want to zoom in on, the word called tawny, because this is a word that people don't really use in present day. So many people may not even know what this word actually means. So let's look it up. I mean, you can look this word up in any dictionary, but for the sake of the argument, you can look on the internet, and it states this: tawny, of an orange brown or yellowish brown color. I mean, the most ironic thing about this is that it states it's yellowish brown or orange brown. Now you should think to yourself, how do we use that in modern day terms? Negroes today call each other red bone and yellow bone due to their red and yellow undertones. You'll find that tawny is actually an old English word for saying this. But that's besides the point. Tawny means brown. So anytime you read books and see the word tawny, it means orange brown or yellowish brown. It does not mean someone of low pigmentation. Now when we go back to what David McRitchie said when he said tawny, we know what it means. But there's something I also want to zoom in on. It says, "We have just seen that many scientific men hold that there have been some grounds for believing portions, at least, of Europe." So it's basically stating that science holds evidence that these people were inhabiting these lands. So let's dig into science. So this is an article you can access online. I'll leave the link in the description. So it says, first modern Britons had dark to black skin. Cheddar Man DNA analysis reveals. So now it's not talking about ancient Britons. It's actually discussing modern Britons. So let's dig into the article and see what it states about the Cheddar Man. It says, these were the Western European hunter-gatherers whose remains have been found in Spain, Luxembourg, and Hungary. Crucially, the DNA of these people also show that they had dark skin and blue eyes and were similar genetic to the Cheddar Man. You see, now you can't say it's to do with opinions or quote-unquote blackwashing history, because the scientists dug up these bones found in these regions, did the DNA analysis, and found that the original inhabitants were in fact dark skin. Now here's a bit more to the article that we need to read. It says, a great many widely held but incorrect assumptions about the expected pale-skinned, fair-featured nature of Britain's founders were promptly overturned, to the rage of some commentators and to the joy of many. You see, it's incorrect to think that the originals of these lands were pale skin, and the author's stating that. And the thing is, the scholars know, the real elites actually know about this history, but they have an agenda. The agenda is to hide it. This is why they're not teaching it in schools, because with this information, it can help empower a certain set of people to know their history, to know who they are and their identity. Anyway, to finish it up, it states, the new research underlines some essential and unexpected features about the ancestry of British people. So essentially what the author's trying to state is, this is British history. Whether you like it or not, even though it's unexpected for you to think that dark-skinned people were not living in these lands during these times, the author's trying to state it's still part of the truth. So now, we don't only have archaeological and historical proof, we have scientific proof, just like what David McRitchie said. So here's another one, the Swedes. It reads, a documentary claiming that the first Swedes were dark-skinned has fragile white folks up in arms. I mean, yes, you're going to be mad when hearing this information, but the real question will be is, why are you not mad at the people who lied to you? I mean, they're the ones who hid the information. They're the ones who made you believe something that's not even true. I mean, just what James Anderson and David McRitchie said, that the original Europeans were dark-skinned. So this is nothing to do with race. This is nothing to do with colour. These are so-called white men who actually independently did their research through history and found this truth. Here's another one. This is whom scholars call the Ipswich Man. So let's read about him. I'm going to start from paragraph 2. It reads, "Our African man was excavated from a burial ground of a friary in Ipswich. This incontrovertible statement generates a significant number of questions. Why was an African man in Ipswich in medieval times? What was he doing there? How did he get there? Where did he come from? And why was he buried in a cemetery of a friary? What did he look like? And how did he die?" I'm literally picturing the faces of the scholars when reading these questions. Can you imagine how dramatic their faces would look from discovering a black man who lived in Ipswich in medieval times? It may have looked something like this. Just to go back to the question, it says, why was an African man in Ipswich in the medieval times? And as we all know, through our research, we know the answer to these questions. Because dark-skinned people were inhabiting them lands. So what the author's trying to say, from what he said at the end about the medieval times, he's trying to say that black people, African people, Negroid people, was living in Great Britain during the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. So the question is now, why don't they show you this in their movies? Why don't they show this in TV series like The Tudors? Why don't they show you this in movies like Braveheart, Vikings, Joan of Arc, The Kingdom of Heaven? These were movies based on real life events that happened throughout history. So why not show the original people that was meant to be in these movies? You want to know why? Because like I stated before, there is an agenda to whitewash the images. You mean to tell me that some of them characters, if not all, weren't correctly portrayed in them shows? You mean to tell me that William Wallace may have looked something like Kendrick Lamar than Mel Gibson? Nah, you're going too far. Even though you show me proof through images, archaeology, science, essays and books, I'm still not going to believe it. That is how they'll respond. But not to worry, the truth ain't meant for everyone, so let's keep it moving. Here's a little bit more. It says, to have these areas of science all independently confirming the same region of the world for his place of origin is compelling evidence of his ancestry. So all these areas of science, physics, biology, chemistry, carbon dating, forensic analysis, have independently, so they didn't even come together, they independently confirm this information as fact. I'm gonna let that sink in. Let's read a bit more. However, it was a revelation for the historians, incontrovertible proof of African migration into England in the medieval times. I mean, the author's trying to state that they migrated there during the medieval times, but we know through our evidence that black people were living there before these times. However, this statement helps reinforce the fact that black people were living in England during the medieval times. Uh-oh, we all know who this guy is. Benjamin Franklin, one of the most notorious founding fathers of America. Well, so-called founding fathers of America. So you mean to tell me Benjamin Franklin had something to say as well regarding this topic? This is from a book called Observations Concerning Increase of Mankind, People in Countries, etc. I mean, the title of this essay is really long, so for time purposes and space, I'll just put ETC. However, I'll need the name of this essay in the description. It reads on page 10, the number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small. So Mr. Benjamin Franklin understands that his people are the real minority. And it says, all Africa is black or tawny. There goes that word tawny again. We already gave the breakdown on what it means. And it says, Asia, chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of newcomers, meaning excluding the colonizers, including Mr. Benjamin Franklin himself. America, exclusive of newcomers, wholly so. So it's basically saying America as well, they're tawny or black. I mean, we can break more hearts in regards to Asia and America in another video, but for the purpose of this topic, we're going to continue. Let's read. And it says, and in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion. Now, what does swarthy mean? Let's look up this word because this is an Old English word, and sure as how no Negro today is talking Old English. So let's understand what Benjamin Franklin was trying to say using Old English. This is from a dictionary by W.G. Jones entitled Dictionary of the English Language, 1768. Perfect, because this is around the time Benjamin Franklin was living. Swarthy or swarthy, depending on if you're British or American. Sea swart, dark of complexion, black, dusky, and we'll see this word again, tawny. So clearly we see that tawny is in relation to swarthy, dark complexion or black. So how can we identify swarthy or swarthy with people today? Here's some visual examples for you to understand. Some famous people today, like Tyrese or Idris Elba, they're considered swarthy because they're of dark complexion. And even though the word black came up in the definition, as you can see through this picture, Idris Elba is not physically black. Why, you may ask? Because his skin tone is not the same colour as his shirt. Therefore, people who look like this today, we know that they're called black, but through our own observation, as we see, their skin tone is actually dark shades of brown. Because even in the ancient world, and even in modern day times, people use the word black to refer to someone with dark skin. I just like to point that out there because it's in the definition. I mean, the reason why we see tawny there in the definition is because it's in correlation to swarthy. I mean, I said earlier in the video that tawny was to do in correlation to someone who was dark skinned. So I said that it was an Old English word that we used to use to describe someone of light skin complexion. People like Chris Brown or Michael Ealy, they'll be considered tawny. Still a Negro, still swarthy, but just a lighter shade of that dark complexion. But anyway, now we understand what Benjamin Franklin was saying when he said swarthy. So we not only stated that the people of Africa were tawny, but the people of America and of Asia were tawny also. Not just them, but the Europeans, the Spaniards, the Italians, French, Russians and Swedes were all this complexion. So now, when we look back at the scientific evidence we found depicting the Europeans as dark skinned, Mr. Benjamin Franklin helped support this find. So there must be a question you must be asking right now. Even with all this evidence, how come when I see it on TV or when I go to a museum or look for a history book, how come I always see white images? Okay, we'll break it down right now. Job chapter 9 verse 24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? So there's your answer. The Most High said himself, everything that is written before time is written for our learning. So the Most High is trying to interpret this message over to his people that there's going to come a time when wicked people are going to rule the earth and are going to cover your faces. This is the main reason why we see white images all over churches, all in archives and museums, because they covered the faces of the judges. This is a book called African Presence in Early Europe by Evan van Sertima. It's on page 239. At this point, it is most fitting to recall a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, which states, "We can give up entirely, if we wish, the whole attempt to delimit races, but we are saying divide the world into whites, yellows and blacks, and then call blacks whites." See, that clearly links in with the scriptures about covering the faces of the judges. It was their agenda to cover up all these black faces you see throughout Europe and paint them white. One more. This is a book called The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by Dr. John L. Johnson. This is on page 14 and 15. The Europeans have barbarically burned, looted and disfigured thousands of old African European rural paintings, sculptures, public works in order to erase any evidence of an early African dominance. Many of today's images of the black rulers of Europe are falsely propagandized as white people. You see, this is nothing to do with opinions. This is facts. This is something that historians have wrote down because the Europeans, the so-called Europeans, have came in and destroyed all the images. So next time you go into a museum or an archive and see notable people throughout the Dark Ages, Middle Ages and medieval times, just know you could be looking at a so-called black man or woman. I mean, look at this guy. What's he doing? He's repainting an image and he's portraying it as white. This is what they did throughout history. This is the main reason why people hate each other today. Because they feel like they don't fit in anywhere. They feel like they don't fit in history. Because everywhere they look, everywhere they turn, they see white images. So now you should be feeling like Wesley Snipes right now. Just a joke. But behind every joke, there's a bit of truth. Just understand that your history teacher lied. Your history teacher didn't tell you the truth. I mean, we talk about black history. This is real black history.
Say